Okay. Good evening. Hello. Welcome to the 200th reading in this stream. It has been 3 years, just barely over 3 years since I started this stream, and we're at 200. So, and that's about as much celebration as I'm going to do. I think it's a milestone, but I'm going to keep going. So, not like it's an end. It wasn't a goal. It just is. So, here we go. I'm going to jump right on into chapters 19 and 20 tonight. As you can see, we're getting quite a ways through the book. There's the bookmark there. So, not too many chapters to go. All right. Chapter 19, The 21st Century Degradation Ceremony. Blogs as machines of mockery, shame, and punishment. And we have two quotes. It is taking one's conjectures rather seriously to roast someone alive for them, by Michel de Montaigne. Or Michel. Anyway, the second one is We grow tired of everything but turning others into ridicule and congratulating ourselves on their defects, by William Hazlitt, from On the Pleasure of Hating, 1826. All right. Sociologist Gerald Cromer once noted that the decline of public executions coincided almost exactly with the rise of the mass newspaper. Oscar Wilde said it best, quote, "In the old days men had the rack, now they have the press." End quote. If only they had known what was coming next. Online lynch mobs, social media shaming, smear campaigns, snark, cyberbullying, distributed denial of service attempts, internet meltdowns, anonymous tipsters, blog wars, trolls, trial by comment section. It is clear to me that the online media cycle is a process not for developing truth, but performing a kind of cultural catharsis. Blogs, I understand from Wilde and Cromer, served the hidden function of dispensing public punishments. Think of the Salem witch trials. They weren't court proceedings, but ceremonies. In that light, the events 300 years ago suddenly feel very real and current. They were doing with trumped up evidence and the gallows what we do with speculation and sensationalism. Ours is just a more civilized way to tear someone to pieces. My experience with digital lynch mobs is unique. I get frantic calls from sensitive millionaires and billionaires who want me to fend these mobs off. Occasionally, they ask that I discreetly direct this mob toward one of their enemies. I am not afraid to say I have done both. I feel I can honestly look myself in the mirror and say the people I protected deserved my efforts, and so did the people I set my sights on. But it is a power I don't relish using, because once I start, I don't stop. Ask the blogger we went after during Tucker's movie campaign. The ad I ran with the blog Media Elites, later called, quote, one of the most despicable personal attacks, end quote, they'd ever seen, read in part, quote, Tucker Max Facts number 47. Domestic violence is not funny unless Gawker editor Richard Blakely gets arrested for it, end quote. The New York Post once caught wind of a campaign of mine against an enemy after my email account was hacked. They were so appalled that they ran a full page article about it in their Sunday edition. Quote, Charney, really me, wages bizarre cyber battle. End quote. This article, along with the press I'd bagged to embarrass our target, hangs on my wall like a hunting trophy. It is interesting to me that when I pointed the attention back toward the media in the domestic assault case involving the editor, it was a, quote, despicable personal attack, end quote. But when the media does it to other people, it's called journalism. The degradation ceremony, sorry. The acts of ritualized destruction are known by anthropologists as degradation ceremonies. Their purpose is to allow the public to single out and denounce one of its members. So, the scapegoat ceremony. The lower to lower their status or expel them from the group. To collectively take out its anger at them by stripping them of their dignity. It is a we versus you scenario with deep biological roots. By the end of it, the disgraced person's status is cemented as not one of us. Everything about them is torn down and rewritten. The burning passion behind such ceremonies, William Hazlitt wrote in his classic essay on the pleasure of hating, carries us back to the feuds, the heartburnings, the havoc, the dismay, the wrongs, and the revenge of a barbarous age and people. End quote. Oh, that was a quote on the pleasure of hating, and then quote carries us back. Sorry about that. You can nudge blogs toward those dangerous instincts. They love the excitement of hunting and the rush of the kill without any of the danger. In the throes of such hatred, he writes, quote, "The wild beast resumes its sway within us." End quote. What happens when that happens? Ask Justine Sacco, who tweeted a misunderstood joke about AIDS, became a trending topic on Twitter, and lost her job. Ask news anchor Brian Williams, who saw decades of goodwill evaporate because he exaggerated a story in a way that every normal person has 100 times. Ask Monica Lewinsky, who dared have consensual sex with a married man 20 years ago and is still paying for it. Ask Jonah Lehrer, the author and speaker who got caught making up quotes and recycling some of his old material in articles online and became a favorite punching bag of journalists. I think about Jonah because I relate to him. We've never met, but I share an editor and a speaking agent with him. I certainly can't afford a $2.25 million historic home in Laurel Canyon like he apparently once did, but for my books and career as a similarly young, though less accomplished author, I might be able to buy a condo nearby. When the story first broke about him, I hated him. I cheered on the people who were attacking him. Serves him right, I thought. It was only in reading John Ronson's absolutely spectacular book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, perhaps the best book on online culture of the last decade, that I got the proper perspective on the infamous plagiarist and fabulist. That perspective is this: there but for the grace of God go I, there but for the grace of God goes any of the rest of us. In one of the book's more remarkable passages, Ronson writes, quote, "We all have ticking away within us something we fear will badly harm our reputation if it got out. Some 'I'm glad I'm not that' at the end of 'I'm glad I'm not me.' Maybe our secret is actually nothing horrendous. Maybe nobody would even consider it a big deal if it was exposed, but we can't take that risk, so we keep it buried." End quote. What is your shame? Can you even bring yourself to mouth it silently to yourself? Or does even that seem tempting fate? Imagine what would happen if someone found out about it. Imagine what they could do to you with it. Personally, I think my work and my behavior are above board. I believe my passwords and accounts to be secure, but I wouldn't bet my life on it, would you? Yet increasingly those are the stakes required for the gamble of daily life. Our online culture is both fueled by and ruled by this bitterness and anger that pretend that other people aren't human beings. Justine Sacco makes a dumb joke. Celebrities take private nude photos that get hacked. Brian Williams embellishes a story or has a generous memory. Amy Pascal says something offensive in an email. Jonah Lehrer self-plagiarizes. The fact that many of us have done the same and gotten away with it, or in fact sit on far darker secrets, is pushed aside. After all, there are page views to get, social share bonuses to collect, pain to sublimate, Right, bloggers? None of this is to say that these people or other people who raise our ire did nothing wrong. They usually did. In fact, almost all the people who have been publicly shamed have done something abhorrent. But even if it is something shameful, that doesn't mean they should be shamed for it. We got rid of public shaming as a form of criminal punishment because it is cruel. I don't think so. I think we should bring it back, honestly. Like real public shaming. We definitely shouldn't be doing it to people without a trial. Lincoln lived long before the internet, but in one of his early speeches, he made a warning that echoes to this day. Quote, "There is no grievance that is a fit object of redress by mob law," end quote. Especially something dumb somebody said or did when they were a kid. Most of what I'm saying here was said much more eloquently and persuasively in Monica Lewinsky's TED Talk, The Price of Shame. But initially, I didn't even watch it. Why would I? She's a joke, I thought. Even when I saw it shared widely on Facebook by my friends, my first mental justification for watching it was thinking I might be able to make fun of it and TED in an article. In fact, it's very good and wise and important, and I feel like a heel for having dismissed it out of hand. As she says in the talk, her scandal was the first to be amplified and distributed through the internet. It was the initial glimpse of what human nature plus digital tools does to the crowd. It is not a pretty sight, and surely was a horrific experience. The person who felt the consequences most painfully was the one who had done the least amount wrong, was the least culpable, and could least afford the cost. And today, from the seeds of that scandal, we now live in a world where, as she aptly surmises, quote, "public humiliation is a commodity and shame is an industry," end quote. But one of the problems of our society is people's lack of shame. What what used to be shameful to do in public, people will do deliberately, film themselves doing it and post it to get clicks. And that's the problem, I think. People have no shame anymore. And so the landscape is completely different. So I have to definitely disagree here with some of this. It's a it's a ringer we've gone on to put what it's a ringer we've gone on to put so many people through, from Lehrer to Seiko to Amy Pascal, to people whose names should have never been made public in the first place. Whatever their actual wrongdoings, we treated them like they weren't human beings. We deliberately pretended that we weren't human beings with our flaws too. This is not how we solve things. It's not how the world is improved. It just feels good for a fleeting moment, and it makes a select handful of media and technology entrepreneurs wealthy while their goons feel important. This is the shame of our public shamings. Disagree with something, just make fun of it. New Yorker critic David Denby came closest to properly defining snark in his book Snark. It's mean, it's personal, and it's ruining our conversation. He didn't succeed entirely, but, quote, snark attempts to steal someone's mojo, erase her cool, annihilate her effectiveness with the nasty, insidious, rug pulling, teasing insult which makes reference to some generally understood shared prejudice or distaste, end quote, will do. My test is a little simpler. You know you're dealing with snark when you attempt to respond to a comment and realize that there is nothing you can say. The remark doesn't mean anything, though it still hurts, and the person saying it doesn't care enough about what they said, or anything else for that matter, that you can criticize them back. If I called you a douche, how would you defend yourself without making it worse? You couldn't. Snark is an incredibly effective weapon in enforcing norms, and dismissing ideas you don't like. Just make fun of someone until they can't be taken seriously anymore. That's the ethos of much of today's media. Yet a snark victim's first instinct is to appeal to reason, to tell the crowd, quote, hey, that's not true, they're making this up, end quote, or appeal to the humanity of the writer by contacting them personally to ask, quote, why are you doing this to me, end quote. I try to stop clients from doing this. I tell them, I know this must hurt, but there's nothing you can do. It's just jujitsu. The energy you'd exert in your defense will be used against you to make the embarrassment worse. Snark is profitable and easy for blogs because they don't care about anyone on the other side of it. It's the perfect device for people who have nothing to say but who have to talk or blog for a living. Snark is the grease of the wheels of the web. Discussing issues fairly would take time and cognitive bandwidth that blogs just don't have. Snark is the style of choice because it's click-friendly, cheap, and fast. Bloggers love to hide snark in adjectives, to cut an entire person down with just a few words. You find it in nonsensical mock superlatives. Obama is the compromiser in chief, quote unquote. So and so is a perv. Jennifer Love Hewitt gains a few pounds and becomes Jennifer Love Chewett. So is rapey. So and so is basic, or an asshat, or a goon, or someone once wrote about me, they have a punchable face. What does any of this even mean? Why do bloggers say things like these? Lines such as these are intended not so much to wound or to prick, as to prick, not to humiliate but to befuddle, not to make people laugh but to make them smirk or chuckle, to annihilate without effort. You can see snark and its problems embodied in Nikki Fink, the notorious Hollywood blogger, and her annual tradition of live snarking. Hollywood award shows on the blog Deadline Hollywood. One year, Fink's live snarking of the Academy Awards was filled with constant criticism that the show was gay because it had too much singing and dancing. Funny, right? The height of incisive comedy, to be sure. After repeatedly calling it the gayest Oscars ever, Fink turned around and railed against the Academy's choice to recognize comedian Jerry Lewis with a humanitarian award because of his anti-gay slurs. Jokes he'd told during his telethon that raised more than $60 million for muscular dystrophy. Humanitarian my ass, quote unquote, she wrote. Good one, Nikki. The same goes for the Deadspin piece. What does Mike Pence think happens at restaurants, quote unquote, which makes fun of the vice president's decision to never dine alone with a woman other than his wife. I'll admit I thought it was weird when I heard Pence refuse to eat with a member of the opposite sex. I mean, who cares? And I thought the headline was a funny take on it. Then I read the article, which includes this remarkable admission, quote, full disclosure, I am making fun of myself here too. My wife and I have been married for 9 years, and in those 9 years, I have not shared a one-on-one meal with any other woman except maybe my mother or sister, end quote. So to get that straight, the writer is guilty of the same thing he's mocking the vice president for. This is snark in its purest form, just preposterously, self-righteously full of shit. In Fink's case, she had made her own gay jokes, but somehow she's not only not a hypocrite, she's superior to Lewis, even though the man actually gets off his ass and helps people. In the Deadspin piece, the writer claims his reasons were different, that he has never eaten alone with a woman other than his wife because, and I quote, he is an asocial hermit, quote unquote. But that's sort of the whole point. Even though his reason is actually weirder, this doesn't stop him from making fun of someone else. Bloggers love snark because it isn't undermined by pathetic hypocrisy. Snark is magical that way. Think about how often our people are labeled douchebags or, more recently, bros. And then he's got a bunch of headlines here. Your Daily Douchebag, John Mayer, edit edition, PerezHilton.com. Meanwhile, McCain locks up the notorious douchebag demographic, Huffington Post. Are MGMT douchebags? Does it matter, Huffington Post. Bud Selig is bad for baseball, a douchebag, SB Nation. Internet douchebag, all this responds to controversy, VentureBeat. To be called a douche or a bro or any such label is to be branded with all the characteristics of what society has decided to hate but can't define. It's a way to dismiss someone entirely without doing any of the work or providing any of the reasons. It says, quote, you are a fool and everyone thinks so, end quote. It is the ultimate insult because it deprives the recipient of the credentials of being taken seriously. I'm not saying dueling was a good thing, but at least there used to be a remedy if your honor was insulted or your dignity threatened. What are you supposed to do today? Just take it? Just let people slander and mock you in front of millions of people? The always controversial and often mocked Scott Adams, creator of Dilbert, once said in an interview, quote, ideas are society's fuel. I drill a lot of wells, most of them are dry. Sometimes they produce. Sometimes the well catches on fire, end quote. We have to be able to handle that as adults and forgive and forget the occasional stupid remark. We can't turn everyone into a laughingstock, or pretty soon the only type of person left will be Donald Trump. Uh, because you know who doesn't mind snark or mockery? Who likes it? The answer is obvious. People with nothing to lose. People who need to be talked about like attention-hungry reality stars. There is nothing that you could say that would hurt the cast of Jersey Shore or DJ Khaled or the Cash Me Outside girl. They need you to talk about them, to insult them, and to make fun of them or turn them into memes. Or turn them into memes is to do that. Oh, wait a minute. Let me reread that sentence. They missed some words there. They need you to talk about them, to insult them, and to make fun of them or turn them into memes is to do that. They have no reputation to ruin, only notoriety to gain. So the people who thrive under snark are exactly those who we wish would go away, and the people we value most as cultural contributors lurk in the back of the room, hoping not to get noticed and hurt. Everything in between may as well not exist. Snark encourages the fakeness and stupidity it is supposedly trying to rail against. In fact, I don't think it's controversial to say that Trump thrives in our new media world in part because he, like some superbug that has become immune to antibiotics, transcends snark and criticism. His rise might be due less to his media manipulation skills than to his unadulterated shamelessness. And so I want you to think about that the next time you lazily dismiss someone with a joke. It might work on them, but think about whom it doesn't work on and whether the alternative is better. I'd say he's a victim of his own criticism here, or not a victim, but he should be criticizing himself. He's using the same kind of snark about Trump as he's been talking about, which is kind of funny. The cost of scandal hysteria. A few years ago, I was part of a high-profile, multi-million-dollar lawsuit involving Dov Charney and Woody Allen. After being accused early on in a series of sexual harassment lawsuits, Dove and American Apparel ran two large billboards in New York City and Los Angeles featuring a satirical image of Woody Allen dressed as a Hasidic Jew with the words, "the highest rabbi" in Yiddish. Allen sued the company for $10 million for wrongfully using his likeness. You may remember hearing about it, but you probably didn't know that the billboards, which ran for only a few weeks, were intended to be a statement against the kind of hysterical media-driven destruction talked about here. They were designed to reference the public crucifixion Allen had endured during a personal scandal years earlier. Ironically, this was totally lost because blogs and newspapers were too focused on the lawsuit's big name celebrity drama to discuss the intended message. In response, I helped Dove write a long statement that was eventually turned into an editorial in The Guardian. It said in part, quote, and this is a long quote, "My intention was to call upon people to see beyond media and lawsuit-inspired scandal and to consider people for their true value and their contribution to society. I feel that the comments of a former friend of Woody Allen, Harvard professor and famous civil rights lawyer Alan Dershowitz, apply to this particular phenomenon." And this is a quote within the quote. Well, quote, well, let's remember we have had presidents from Jefferson to Roosevelt to Kennedy to Clinton who have been great presidents. I think we risk losing some of the best people who can run for public office by our obsessive focus on the private lives of public figures, end quote. And then continuing the quote that it's within, I agree that the increasingly obsessive scrutinization of people's personal lives and their perceived social improprieties has tragically overshadowed the great work of too many artists, scientists, entertainers, entrepreneurs, athletes, and politicians, including Woody Allen. End quote. Dove was no angel, but I think he deserved better, at least when it came to the media coverage. The lawsuits against him were complicated, and little intelligent reporting was ever done on them. Reporting beyond the sensational claims in the legal documents, I don't recall many articles following up when claims were dropped or recanted. In any case, blogs are our representatives in the degradation ceremonies. They level the accusations on behalf of the outraged public. Even if we are not angels in our lives, we ask, how dare you hold yourself up in front of us as a human being? If you don't feel shame, then we will make you feel shame, or perhaps you will feel shame so we don't have to. The onlookers delight in the destruction and pain. Blogs lock onto targets for whatever frivolous reason, which makes sense since they often have played a role in creating the victim's celebrity in the first place, usually under equally frivolous pretenses. It used to be that someone had to be a national hero before you got the privilege of the media and the public turning on you. You had to be a president or a millionaire or an artist. Now we tear people down just as we've begun to build them up. We do this to our fame balls, our viral video stars, our favorite new companies, even random citizens who pop into the news because they did something interesting, unusual, or stupid. First we celebrate them, then we turn to snark, and then finally to merciless decimation. No wonder only morons and narcissists enter the public sphere. It feels good to be a part of something, to tear down and berate. It's not surprising to me that the media would want to assume this role. Consider how this ceaseless, staged, and artificial online news chase makes today's generation of reporters feel. They attended an expensive grad school and live in New York City or San Francisco or Washington, D.C. The wondrous $200,000 a year journalism job is not some myth to them. It was an opportunity dangled in front of them and then taken away. Their life is nothing like that myth. Bloggers just write and film and publish an insurmountable amount of material per day, and only if they're lucky will any of it be rewarded with a bonus or health insurance. Yet the people who they cover are often rich and successful, or worse, idiotic and talentless reality television stars. It's enough to make anyone bitter and angry, and indeed they are. They grind with the quote-unquote rage of the creative underclass, as New York Magazine called it. Philosopher Alain de Botton once pointed out that Greek tragedies, though popular entertainment in their day, had a purpose. Despite being gossipy, sometimes salacious, and often violent, they taught the audience to think about how easily an unfortunate situation could befall them and to be humbled by the flaws of another person. Tragedies could be learned from, but the news of the 21st century what? But the news of the 21st century, he writes, quote, with its lexicon of perverts and weirdos, failures and losers, lies at one end of the spectrum, end quote. And tragedy lies at the other, end quote. There is no intent to instruct in what we see on blogs, just gawking. That is their true function. Their degradation is mere spectacle that blogs use to sublimate the general anxieties of their readers, to make us feel better by hurting others, to stress that the people we're reading about are freaks while we are normal. And if we're not getting anything out of it and nobody learns anything from it, then I don't see how you can call blogs anything other than a digital blood sport. And that's the end of that chapter. And I don't see any reason not to jump right into the next one. It's a shorter chapter. Chapter 20. Welcome to Unreality. Okay, we have one long quote to start this one off. The quack, the charlatan, the jingo, and the terrorist can flourish only where the public is deprived of independent access to information, but where all news comes at second hand, where all testimony is uncertain. Men cease to respond to truths and respond simply to opinions. The environment in which they act is not realities themselves, but the pseudo environment of reports, rumors, and guesses. The whole reference of thought comes to be what somebody asserts and not what actually is. That's by Walter Lippmann, Liberty and the News. Okay. In this book, I have illustrated the ways in which bloggers, as they sit down at their computers, are prompted to speculate, rush, exaggerate, distort, and mislead, and how people like me encourage these impulses. Blogs are assailed on all sides by the crushing economics of their business. Dishonest sources, inhuman deadlines, page view quotas, inaccurate information, greedy publishers, poor training, the demands of the audience, and so much more. These incentives are real, whether you're the Huffington Post or some tiny blog. Taken individually, the resulting output is obvious. Bad stories, incomplete stories, wrong stories, unimportant stories. To me, many of these individual failings were my opportunities. I was able to get coverage for my clients out of it. I was able to advance ideas that I thought were worthwhile. But when I started to see what this process amounted to collectively, the cumulative effect of tens of thousands of such posts, written and uploaded day in and day out, my pride turned to fear. This is always a good question. What if everyone did what they were doing? What would that world look like? I started not to like the answer. What is the result of millions of blogs fighting to be heard over millions of other blogs, each hoping for a share of an increasingly shrinking attention span? What happens when people figure out that Reddit or Twitter can be used to get CNN to cover you? What happens when the incentives ripple through every part of the media system? What happens when the truth no longer really matters, not to readers or reporters? These results are unreality, a netherworld between the fake and the real where each builds on the other and they cannot be told apart. This is what happens when the dominant cultural medium, the medium that feeds our other mediums, is so easily corrupted by people like me. When the news is decided not by what is important but by what readers are clicking, when the cycle is so fast that the news cannot be anything else but consistently and regularly incomplete, when dubious scandals pressure politicians to resign and scuttle election bids, or knock millions from the market caps of publicly traded companies, when the news frequently covers itself in stories about how the story unfolded, unreality is the only word for it. It is, as Daniel Boorstin, author of 1962's The Image, A Guide to Pseudo-Events in America, put it, a, quote, thicket which stands between us and the facts of life, end quote. A slow creep. Let's start with a basic principle. Only the unexpected makes the news. This insight comes from Robert E. Park, the first sociologist to ever study newspapers. Quote, "For the news is always finally," he wrote, "what Charles A. Dana described it to be, something that will make people talk." End quote. Nick Denton told his writers the same thing nearly 100 years later. Quote, "The job of journalism is to provide surprise." End quote. News is only news if it departs from the routine of daily life. But what if most of what happens is expected? Most things do not depart from the routine. Most things are not worth talking about. But the news must be, and so the normal parts of life are omitted from the news by virtue of being normal. I don't mean to say that the constant search for newness or the unexpected is what distorts the news. That would be unfair, because almost everything blogs do distorts the news. But this one basic need, fundamental to the very business of blogging, inherently puts our newsmakers at odds with reality. It can only show us a version of reality that serves their needs. What's known as news is not a summary of everything that has happened recently. It's not even a summary of the most important things that have happened recently. The news, whether it's found online or in print, is just the content that successfully navigated the media's filters, possibly with my help. Since the news informs our understanding of what is occurring around us, these filters create a constructed reality. Picture a funnel. At the top, we have everything that happens, then everything that happens that comes to be known by the media, then everything that is considered newsworthy, then what they ultimately decide to publish, and finally what spreads and is seen by the public. And the news funnel, which he just named everything, but it has in large print at the top, taking up the whole width of the page, all that happens. Then in a smaller font and shrinking in a little bit, all that's known by the media. Then again, smaller, all that is newsworthy. Then smaller, all that is published as news. Then smallest yet, all that spreads. In other words, the media is in some ways inherently a mechanism for systematically limiting what the public sees. But we seem to think that the news is informing us. The internet is what technologists call an experience technology. The more it is used, the more trust users have in it. The longer a user engages with it, the more comfortable they get, and the more they believe in the world it creates. As we become immersed in blogs, our trust in the information we get from them increases. I saw an example of this very clearly in my own education. I watched internet sources, quote unquote, go from strictly forbidden in school research to the status quo, and the citing of Wikipedia articles in papers from unacceptable to, quote, okay, but only for really general background information, end quote. Internet culture has done one thing with this trust, utterly abused it. Embracing the fake. In April 2011, Business Insider editor Henry Blodgett put out an advisory to the PR world. He was drowning in elaborate story pitches and information about new services. He just couldn't read them all, let alone write about them, so he proposed a solution. The publicists could write about the product launches of their own clients, and Blodgett's site would edit and publish them. Quote, "In short," he concluded, "please stop sending us emails with story ideas and just contribute directly to Business Insider. You'll get a lot more ink for yourself and your clients, and you'll save yourself a lot of wasted work." End quote. His post was seen more than 10,000 times, and each and every view, I can only assume, was followed by a marketer coming all over their pants. In Blodgett's overzealous drive to create traffic for his site, he didn't mind misinforming. He didn't care who wrote it, so long as it got page views. He was willing to let PR and market professionals and people like me write material about their own clients, which he would then pass off as real news and commentary to his readers. He was early to this trend, but hardly the only one to follow it. Today, with almost every major media outlet opening their platform up to self-interested contributors, when all the protections against conflicts of interest or even basic factual inaccuracies have disappeared, the vast majority of the information we find in the media is biased or manipulated. Worse, every major television channel seems to think that campaign surrogates, that is, naked shills for certain politicians, deserve airtime as a means of being balanced. It's surreal and scary to watch real spin be created in real time, to watch what was supposed to be objective news outlets paying campaign operatives to come up with lies on behalf of candidates right in front of you. And part of the reason they allow this, the outraged response online from partisan websites, is good for traffic and branding. The reason CNN lets Scotty Nell Hughes say dumb things is because those dumb things get lots of attention. It's the same reason they let men and women embarrass themselves on reality television, but at least nobody thinks reality TV is news. We know that it is trash. From the fake, the real. The process is simple. Create a pseudo event, trade it up the chain, elicit real responses and action, and you have altered reality itself. I may understand the consequences of it now, but that doesn't stop a part of me, even as I write this, from seeing this thirst as an opportunity to insert messages into the discussion online. You can't count on people to restrain themselves from taking advantage of an absurd system, not with millions of dollars at stake. Not when the last line of defense, the fourth estate, known as the media, is involved in the cash grab too. From here we get the defining feature of our world today, a blurred line between what is real and what is fake, and what actually happens and what is staged, and finally between the important and the trivial. There is no doubt in my mind that blogs and blogging culture were responsible for this final break. When blogs can openly proclaim that getting it first is better than getting it right, when a deliberately edited fake video can reach and within hours require action by the President of the United States, when the perception of the major city can be shaped by what photographs spread best in an online slideshow, and when someone like me can generate actual outrage over advertisements that don't actually exist, the unreal becomes impossible to separate from the real. Quote, "The news media is a giant unquiet, overstimulated mind that won't let itself rest and won't let the rest of us rest," end quote, is how Gavin de Becker put it in Fear Less. That's the problem. If fake news simply deceived, or if the glut of information only harmlessly distracted, that would be one thing. The problem with unreality and pseudo events is not simply that they are unreal, it is that they don't stay unreal. While they may themselves exist in some netherworld between real and fake, the domain in which they are consumed and acted on is undoubtedly real. In being reported, these counterfeit events are laundered and passed to the public as clean bills to buy real things. The anxiety of the media becomes the anxiety of the world and becomes the weakness by which the powerful are able to control and direct us. The news might be fake, but the decisions we make from it are not. As Walter Lippmann wrote, the news constitutes a sort of pseudo-environment, but our responses to that environment are not pseudo, but actual behavior. In 1922, Lippmann warned us, quote, about the worldwide spectacle of men, government officials, bankers, executive artists, ordinary people, and even other reporters acting upon their environment, moved by stimuli from their pseudo-environment, end quote. That world is exactly what we have now. It's a world where in 2002, Vice President Dick Cheney leaked bogus information to an attention-hungry reporter for the New York Times and then mentioned his own leak on Meet the Press to help convince us to invade Iraq. Quote, there's a story in the New York Times this morning and I want to attribute the Times, end quote, Cheney said, citing himself using something he had planted in the press as proof that untrue information was now public and accepted fact. He used his own pseudo-event to create pseudo-news. It's a world where Trump becomes president by getting the media to repeat his dystopian paranoia and negativity enough times that people start to really believe that things are terrible. They substitute objective reality for the narrative they hear online and on TV. No comment. I used unreality to get free publicity. Cheney used his media manipulations to drive the public toward war. Trump used it to stir tensions with our neighbors and to slander entire races and regions, and no one was able to stop it. By the time they did, the facts had been established. The fake made real by media chatter, and real wars had been waged. From the pseudo-environment came actual behavior. Welcome to unreality, my friends. It's fucking scary. That's the end of that chapter. And let's see. I think we have 3 chapters in the conclusion left. No, we have 1 chapter in the conclusion left. So one more reading in this book, and that will be that. So that'll be Friday. And then we get to start something new. And I already know what it is, kind of. I need to narrow it a little bit. I've had the same request multiple times to read some philosophy, specifically Plato. So I'm going to go ahead and do that because I promised I would. I just need to find out from the person specifically what he wanted me to read. He was general and just said Plato, but I'd like to narrow it down a bit. And we'll go from there. So, well, let's see. In fact, it was Vesper that requested it, and he happens to be on, and I think I'll go raid him. So bear with me. Give him a minute or two of your time, and I will take us on over there. See you there.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace.